Hello, everyone. My name is Julie McVey, and this is Unordinary Made Ordinary, where we talk about extraordinary experiences of everyday people. After today's interview, if you would like to continue the conversation of all things metaphysical, paranormal, and supernatural, feel free to join our private UMO group by clicking on the link in the video description. And today, our guest is Annette Marinaccio, and I forgot to ask you how to pronounce your last name.
That was perfect.
Really? Is that how you say
Yeah,
it?
Marinaccio.
Oh, good for Julie. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm really glad we can hang out together. I've been looking forward to this. So Annette, would you mind sharing a little bit about yourself?
Sure, sure. I live in New York. I was born and raised in New York, and my background is CPA. I'm a certified public accountant and a healthcare executive. And I absolutely love numbers, accounting, and I love being a healthcare executive. I love healthcare. So I'm one of those individuals that really enjoys my job and enjoys working.
Nice.
So yeah, so that's my day to day. I have family, a husband, and two adult children, and a great dog, a little dog,
Uh-huh.
and yeah, that's my sort of like who I am, my background. Enjoy, friends, family, things like that.
Very nice. And one thing I do like to ask my guests, it's a curiosity of mine. Did you grow up in a household that was religious or spiritual, like spiritual practices of any kind?
So that's a great question. I actually mentioned in my book that I was raised in the Roman Catholic faith, and I would consider my mother religious and spiritual, but we didn't openly talk about anything spiritual other than church. So and I enjoyed church. You go and you sit and you pray and meditate, and there's a sense of community. So that's how I was raised. And I took that into my adult life, so that
Okay.
I raised my children that way. But I will say I started fading away from the church over the last 10 or 15 years,
Oh,
as I started learning more about the afterlife, and I started understanding that some of the aspects of the church were a bit I don't want to say distasteful to me, but did not coincide with some of the things that I learned. So,
mhm.
but that's how I was raised, and I still consider myself Roman Catholic, and I still do attend church. It's just it doesn't hold the same place in my daily life than that it did prior to my understanding that there's an afterlife.
When you were a kid and teenager and young adult, did you, because you're going to church here and there, do you think that you thought about the afterlife at all? Or was it just really just community and tradition and church services?
Well, I assumed that what I learned was the truth, right? That there's a heaven and there's a hell, and you should really
Okay.
um, obey, rules and those 10 commandments. And they make sense because those 10 commandments are basically, please be polite and be kind and be good to people. So
Right.
they made sense. Um, and that, you know, um, Jesus rose from the dead, so that made sense that he could do that. Never made a connection that any of the rest of us could do that. I never made a connection, but
Okay.
so yeah, I would say that yeah, that was my upbringing.
Okay. And what about any kind of supernatural stuff going on in the home as you're growing up? Paranormal, anything?
I would say nothing. As a matter of fact, the only thing that I did just dawned on me when I was attending one of your wonderful Facebook chats, and somebody I think had mentioned sleep paralysis,
Uh-huh.
or maybe one of your something you wrote, something in your group, and I was like, oh my goodness, I had that. I know as a teenager, there were often times that I would be asleep but my soul, I guess, not that I made the connection at the time, desperately wanted to get up, and I was like, I
Interesting.
couldn't get awake, and I was like screaming, come on, you've got to wake up, you've got to wake up, you've got to wake up. But my body couldn't wake up. I never did anything with it, and it happened over and over again. And I wonder now and it lasted probably about a year off and on, and then went away. I would say maybe 15, 16 years old.
Okay.
And I wonder now if I had gone with it and really not just tried to have my soul wake my body up, but instead had my soul say, all right, you stay behind, body, let me let me
Exactly.
see what's out there. I
Exactly.
think my understanding would have been something that I might have had. My understanding of maybe things supernatural would have been
Yeah.
something I understood back in my teens, but that didn't happen. Instead, every time it happened, I was very focused on trying to wake my body up.
Right.
And
Of course. Yeah.
yeah,
That's what
and
the
that was it.
kids do.
Yeah,
Could you imagine if parents started teaching like,
I
oh,
know.
by the way, when you have sleep paralysis, everyone's going to be going out of their body consciously. If we start teaching this, I'll teach it to
Right.
my grandkids. I didn't do that with my kids. So,
Yeah.
um, okay. So then if that's the case, what got you involved in these kinds of unusual topics? Unordinary, but let's make them ordinary topics.
Ordinary, right, right. So what happened to me is that I don't like to say I'm skeptical, although some people say, "Oh, you were skeptical." I wasn't skeptical. I just really never thought about the afterlife. After those sort of exploratory teen years where you're trying to figure everything out, I got all involved with college and my career and my family, and
Yeah.
I was very happy in the 2D/3D kind of world, and that was how I lived my life. And it wasn't until my mother-in-law crossed over, which was 2006, that she was determined to prove to me that she was still here. And I
Wow.
was like, so that really took me
That's interesting.
quite some time to digest and appreciate and accept.
Hmm.
But after I did accept that, okay, I get it, you're still here, even though I thought you had died, you really are still here. After I accepted that, I spent probably 4 years with all of my discretionary time entrenched in everything metaphysical, because
Yeah.
I just, being a CPA, being an accountant, my left brain is so dominant, the left side of my brain.
Yeah.
I was like, I have to figure this out, because most importantly, if we go on, then what are we doing here? What is what is this? So I really needed to get my head around that. And I
Yeah,
did.
I understand.
Yeah, it took about 4 years, and I feel like, okay, I got it. And then as the universe would have it, because now I understand how the universe works a little bit more, the universe would place me in front of people over the course of the next 4 years that needed pieces of what I had learned. And I
Ah,
was able to sort of pull them out and say, oh, this, you're going through this because of blah, 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 or blah, blah, blah. And then, and that's when I realized sometime around 2019 or so, that I really should put a book out, because I need to just consolidate everything I
mm,
learned into something very usable and functional and digestible,
mhm.
so that it can live on.
Yes, yes. Was your mother-in-law spiritual or religious?
So another great question. I would say that my mother-in-law was very similar to my parents, and
Mm,
my husband raised very similarly to me. Also Roman Catholic, and not
mm.
particularly spiritual, and not particularly religious, but also, yes, spiritual and religious. Went to church and that kind of thing. So very similar in terms of her faith, I would say.
And she started reaching out to you and no one else at first?
Um, she actually reached out to my daughter
Oh,
before
she
me.
first. Okay. Would you mind kind of walking us through those beginning stages and what you thought about it?
Right. Oh, sure. So my mother-in-law, and I also want to point out that a reason that I was able to understand and accept it is because it was my mother-in-law. It wasn't like I was in tremendous grief. I mean, we were absolutely a very close
True.
family.
Right.
But a lot of times people say that you know, your mind plays tricks on you because you're going through something and you're very grief stricken.
Right.
And I wasn't tremendously grief stricken. I mean, I absolutely love her, and now I understand our souls are connected. Um,
Oh,
but but you know, at that time, it was rough to bury any of our loved ones, but I wasn't in horrible grief as you might be if you lost a
hmm,
child or something like that.
right.
Um,
Actually, I've heard that if sometimes the child, for example, will wait before reaching out to the parent because they are in such deep grief
right.
that they feel like there needs to be a cooling off or a waiting period. That's what I've heard. But anyway,
Yeah,
continue.
yeah. So I'm sure probably every case is just a little bit different, you know, like every person in life is.
Yes,
But
yes.
right. But at any rate, what happened in my case was we buried my mother-in-law on a Saturday, and in 2006, and we sent balloons up at the grave site, and it was a really emotional
Mm,
day. She had died of pancreatic cancer, so
uh,
she had suffered for about a year.
mm,
And on the Wednesday after we buried her, my 13-year-old daughter at the breakfast table before she went to school and before I went to work said in a very matter-of-fact way, Grandma, her name was Lucille, Grandma Lucille gave me a sign yesterday. And I was like, really? Now, we have not spoken about the afterlife in my family, so I thought that was sort of interesting.
mhm.
So I said, what kind of sign? And she said she sent me pom-poms. And I was just like, she sent you pom-poms? How did she send you pom-poms? And my daughter told me the story that she was making a 3D card in art class the day before. There were about 12 kids in her art class, and they each had individual tables. And she went to the supply closet, to get the Tupperware of assorted color and size pom-poms. She picked out 11 green and 11 red. That's what she decided to make for her card. She recounted them. Even now, as an adult, she's very meticulous, very detail oriented. So she recounted to make sure she had her 11 green and her 11 red. She brought the Tupperware back, and she said, when I came back, there were my 11 green and my 11 red, and a lavender and a white one. And I said, how'd they get there? And she was like, I know. And I could see she
Hmm.
played every possibility in her head. And she was like, she was no one around my table. I know I didn't put them there. So they must have either floated through the air or just appeared there.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay. And so I said, so what do you make of it? And she said, well, Grandma's obviously saying thank you for the balloons, because they were exact colors of the balloons that we let go at the gravesite.
Oh.
And I was like, okay. And she goes, you want to see them? And I was like, okay. And she runs upstairs to her bedroom. She comes down with 2 pom-poms, the exact colors of the balloons. I mean, exact, not even like purple to lavender and off-white. And
Wow.
I was just sort of in shock. But I said to her, well, all I can say is this. If these are really from Grandma Lucille, then when you die, you should be buried with them in your coffin, because that would be, that's just unbelievable. I remember saying that because it was such a shocking thing to me. But I have to say that I thought in my head that it might have been a coping mechanism, and she she really loved her grandmother, and maybe she
Oh.
just placed them there herself.
Hmm.
And I was skeptical,
Mhm.
but liked the idea, so was telling everybody, professional friends,
Because
regular
it's a very
friends.
interesting story. So yeah.
Story I called the pom pom story. So I was telling everybody the pom pom story. And the second thing that was like the 1-2 punch is I'm telling my girlfriend, girlfriend and neighbor who lived two doors down, and she and I were great friends for 10 years. But I guess the afterlife never came up as a topic.
Huh.
People don't openly discuss it. And
Okay.
so when I told her the story, she listened to my whole thing, and she was waiting for me to accept and embrace the afterlife.
Mhm.
And so, and when I stood there like, can you believe it, in shock, she was like, Annette, you believe in the afterlife, don't you? Like, she was so matter of fact about it.
Yeah.
And which is the subtitle of my book, because that's the line that really someone said to me that I was like, wait a minute, what? So now I had my daughter telling me this, and a very trustworthy, credible friend who believes in the afterlife, like very, very matter of fact about it.
Right.
And so I was like, you believe in the afterlife? She goes, yeah, of course they're still here. And so those two things side by side, like a couple of weeks apart, were absolutely the very start for me.
Mm-hmm. Wow. That's interesting. She never talked to you about the afterlife. Was it just, was she also Catholic?
Yes, yeah, we were both Catholic,
Okay.
and both religious. We would go both be in church together and whatnot. But again, I get, unless somebody close to you dies, people don't start talking about the afterlife. So since in the 10 years I had known her, nobody had died in my family and no one had died in her family, so it just didn't come up.
Right. I know what you mean. Hopefully that will change though, and
Hopefully
people
that
will
will change it. I
start
talk
talking
about
about it.
to everybody now. I talk about it because I feel like it affects people that you don't realize it affects.
Yes. So this was soon after the memorial service. And how long after that did you notice your first sign from your mother-in-law?
So that was October, November of 2006. She died in October. So probably I spoke to Maria, who I renamed Donna in my book, but Maria probably beginning of November-ish.
Okay.
And what happened was just a week after that, it was sort of like the other side was leaving me breadcrumbs, like follow the breadcrumbs. That a
Right.
week after that, so while I'm speaking to Maria, she tells me that she frequents one particular medium on Long Island, Josephine Girangelli. She goes
Oh,
there for practical advice. Like
okay.
she taps into her deceased father. She gets advice from her father. Should I
Oh,
sell the house? I'm thinking of naming my son this. What do you think? Like real life practical advice from her deceased father through a
uh-huh.
medium.
But you've known her for 10 years and she never told you she goes to this medium. And
Nope.
another surprise to me is that she must have been an open-minded Catholic, because I thought the religion is like, you shouldn't go to mediums.
So you're absolutely right.
Oh, okay.
Because I also I have a book, one of the chapters in my book is I did not realize that the Catholic faith is opposed to mediums. I didn't realize that.
Okay.
And I happened at one point after I was understanding everything, I happened to go to open confession where you face the priest. And the
Uh-oh.
priest, what I know, whatever. And, he was talking to me about activities to expend stress, because one of the sins that people have, right, is if you're stressed in your life, you're curt with people, or you. So he was talking about stress relief, and he was like, well, what do you do and I think he was hoping I would say I'm a jogger, or
Right.
elliptical, but instead I told him that I'm spending all my time trying to understand the afterlife,
Okay.
and he was
He didn't
mortified.
like that?
Oh
He,
no.
but
Oh
you
no.
didn't say anything about seeing a medium or
No,
anything,
I
did you?
did. He
Oh,
said,
you
how?
did. Oh,
And he
oh,
said, how? And I said, well, I've gone to some mediums, I've read books,
oh.
and it was like this big no-no. And I came home from that open confession and I called my girlfriend Maria, and I was like, okay, wait, what's the deal here? What line did I just cross?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
that was very unpleasant. And she was like, oh my God, Annette, you don't realize that our church doesn't want you frequenting mediums? And I was just like, no. And she said, yeah, her mother considers it like devil worship, And so I was like, really? Like, okay. Like I was just unawares.
So her mother,
Her mother,
now,
Maria's
but
mother,
she goes to the medium to learn, to
from her
speak
father,
to her mother's
husband.
husband.
Correct.
She doesn't tell her mother, I guess, then.
Well, she did initially, she told her, but then her mother was very upset about that. So
Wow.
she
Okay.
stopped, right?
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
okay, so she tells me that she frequents this medium. Okay, fine. So I parked that in my brain. So now I've got the pom-pom story. Maria is very open about the afterlife. She goes to a medium for real life advice,
Things
and,
are
and
opening. Yeah.
right? And then that upcoming, like maybe 2 weeks later, I'm out to dinner in town on my main street in town with my husband, my son, and my recently widowed father-in-law.
Mm.
And they seat us at a table, and it's next to a window, and there's a poster facing the street in the window,
Okay.
but I could see the back of it. And it
Uh-huh.
says dinner and show with Josephine Girangelli, the exact medium that my girlfriend just told me about.
Oh, how long between these two things?
2 weeks, maybe.
Okay.
So,
Interesting.
okay, so there's the breadcrumbs,
Yes.
So I was like, that's weird. Now that show wasn't going to be until the end of April. So
Okay.
maybe 6 months away or 5 months
Okay.
away.
Okay.
But they were advertising it. So I got home, I called my friend and I'm like, do you want to go? And she's like, absolutely. So I recruited another friend and the three of us went to this medium dinner and show. And I was viewing it like a magic show. I had no,
Okay.
even though my girlfriend really believed in it,
You're
I
still
was
not.
just like,
And no breadcrumbs between the restaurant and
not that
the,
I remember.
okay.
Not that
All
I
right.
remember. Living
Okay.
my life. Yeah, living my life. No, no.
Letting the things marinate for a while until April.
Yeah, I guess so. And so what happened in April is after we have dinner together, the medium Josephine starts reading someone, and maybe there's 100 people at restaurant tables in the room,
Okay.
and it would be like what you might see on television. And she starts reading somebody, and she brings through a deceased firefighter or police officer, and they're all crying. And I'm like, oh, they're probably planted there. She probably knows them, like just to make the rest of us feel, like. So that
Yes, yes.
happened.
Like it's the show, part of the
Like
show.
it's the show. And so then what happens after that is she comes right over to me or to our table, and she says, okay, I have a woman here whose name is Lucille. Now my mother-in-law's name is Lucille, and so she said it right off the bat.
Wow.
And she's holding her stomach. My mother had died of pancreatic cancer, and this
Okay.
message is for someone here. And I
Okay.
was frozen. I would not take the microphone. I was just like, my girlfriend must have called her. How can this happen? How could she possibly know her name? This doesn't make any sense to me. I was absolutely frozen.
Mm-hmm.
And so she eventually retreated because I didn't take the microphone, despite the fact my girlfriend was kicking me under the table saying, that's your mother-in-law, take the microphone. And I was like, I couldn't.
Wow.
So Josephine retreats off. She reads somebody else, but my mother-in-law was very insistent. She was determined to get me on that path. And so the medium comes back to our table, and she's like, this woman's still here. Her name is Lucille, something with an L. And now I took the microphone. And I don't know if it's true of everybody, but I know with me, there's one instance where I went from, are we sure about this? To, okay, I'm done, I believe in it.
Mm.
And it was her first line. She said to me, how is Rita doing? Is Rita still here, isn't she? Now, my mother and mother-in-law were both diagnosed with cancer a week apart from each other in 2005. My mother-in-law with pancreatic, my mother with breast. And they spent the next year, both of them, radiation, surgeries.
Your mother's name is?
Rita.
That's pretty crazy.
My mother and mother-in-law were fighting for their life, and when for their lives. And if we would visit either one of them, they would always say, how's the other one, right? How's Rita doing? How's Lucille doing? How's Rita doing? How's Lucille doing?
Yeah.
Because they're both going through it. So when Josephine is standing here now, she just pegged Lucille, and she's asking me how Rita is doing.
Yeah.
And Rita's my mother, and she said it specifically. She said, she's asking how Rita's doing. Rita's still here, isn't she? Now, I will add that my mother and father, married 67 years, both died 2 weeks apart this April, 2022.
Oh.
Not in the book, just happened.
In
Home,
April. Okay.
in April 2022.
Well, I'm so sorry for your loss. I mean, I know
they're still here.
That they're still here, but it's still, the grief is very
consolidated span of time. But I can tell you great afterlife story with my dad too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So, but at any rate, so that was the line for me, the line that was like, I took the reins from my mother-in-law, and I was like, okay, I'm done. this is not a coincidence. I had made the reservations. She doesn't have my credit card. How could she peg both names? It just was impossible. So that was the line that
Mm.
made me say, wait, it's a lot easier to believe that this is true than to fight it.
Yeah.
And then, and then one thing led to another. And like I said, I spent 4 years studying it. And so then I had a great handle on the afterlife and what it's all about. But those were the breadcrumbs that led me to my
Wow.
mother-in-law. And somebody said to me, a girlfriend said to me after I put the book out, she said, geez, your mother-in-law must have been such a strong woman. And I was like, well, she was strong, but I don't know that she was super strong. I mean, and she
Oh.
said, she must have been, you and she must have been so close. And I was like, well, we absolutely loved each other. We had a small, tight-knit family, but I wouldn't say we were super, super close,
Hmm.
And she said, well, why did she pick you then to come
Mhm.
through to? And I was like, I don't know. And then
Hmm.
a little while after that, my girlfriend said to me, I know why. And she said, because she knew you'd write the book. And I was
Oh.
like, oh, you know something? You're absolutely right. I mean, because she knew I'm an accountant. And she's like, it's not about her. It's not about my mother-in-law showing me there's an afterlife. It was about her showing me, so because she knew I would share it.
Ah, I see.
Because they give you knowledge and they give you signs, not to just appease you. They
Right.
they
Bigger
give you
picture.
signs so that you will share it with people, so that more people will be understanding of what we all have at our fingertips.
Yeah.
So I was like, when she said that to me, I was like, oh, you're absolutely right. I'm an accountant. I put my mind to it, and I
Mm, do
wrote
it.
it all up. Yeah, I'm going to do it, and that's exactly right. So that's why the breadcrumbs were left for me.
May I ask you what your father-in-law thought about all this?
So initially, my father-in-law, he was devastated. I mean, he lost his wife and she was 68 at the time, so very young.
Oh man.
So, and he's still here. He's turning
Oh,
84 in a
wow.
couple of weeks. So he was, very devastated. He cared for her. It was very, very difficult. And it wasn't for probably, if that was April of 2007, I would say it was the summer of 2007 after I enlisted my husband in the program to say, you're never going to believe this, Ralph, my husband, you have to, it's your mother. And
Yes,
so I
yes.
started dragging my husband to group sessions, and my mother-in-law kept coming through for him. And then,
Ooh.
right. And so then it was like, yeah, she was insistent. And then she enlisted some of my other deceased relatives, and they were coming through. So it was like one after one after one.
Okay.
And my husband was like, all right, this is really crazy. And I said, I know. So I then took my sister-in-law and father-in-law to a group session, and my mother-in-law came through and, flying colors for them.
My
And
goodness.
yeah, and he's
That's
very
awesome.
supportive now of the book and, into it. It's interesting because I think there are 2 levels or layers, probably a million, but 2 overall levels of grief. And one is sort of cured when you realize life goes on, but it doesn't change the fact that you still have grief, because you can't hold them and talk with them and kiss them and hug them the
Exactly.
way you used to. So there's really 2 levels of grief. And that first level is for people who feel like, really, they go on, that makes me feel so good.
Yeah.
And that's good, but it doesn't change the fact that you still can't have what you had.
Yeah.
So there's still a lot. So, and
Difficult.
that's the truth. Like with my parents, it it was because I understand the afterlife now. Their crossing, helped me understand what they were going through and how it all was working. But it doesn't change the fact that I still am very grief stricken, because I
Yeah,
don't have them
that's
to go visit and talk to anymore, you know?
in the same month.
Yeah, they were both at in-home hospice
Wow.
since for less than a month. March 29th, my mom died April 30. My father had no ailment, which is a weird thing. My mother was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer
Ugh.
at the very end of January, so very recently.
Okay.
And that had spread to her spine. And
Oh,
so we put
jeez.
her at in-home hospice. My sister and I cared for her. We put her in in-home hospice
Mm-mm.
March 29th. And my father stopped eating and stopped walking March 27th.
Oh, I'm
Able-bodied,
gonna, ah,
able-bodied.
don't make me cry.
Yeah. And
It's
he went before her. Now I know.
this is
What I will say,
wild.
knowing the afterlife the way I do, is they lived the way they died. My mother was an absolute social butterfly. She loved every social gathering. She loved parties. She was the life of the party. She was an energetic, outgoing force. And I actually dedicated my book to her. I mean, it was before she even was sick with this next bout of cancer, but her positive attitude was just infectious. My father was the exact opposite, very, very homebody, never really wanted to go out. It was a struggle for him to go out. And so whenever they would go anywhere socially, even a very small family gathering, anything, he would always just look at her and wait for her signal that she's getting ready to leave. And he would be like, great. He would get his hat and coat. He'd be in the car waiting for her. If it took her an hour to say goodbye to everybody, the Italian goodbyes, he would wait there. And the second she got in the car, they would go home. So that's just the way they
Yeah.
lived. On March 26th, now my mother was not really lucid at this point. She was deteriorating. On March 26th was a Saturday, 2022. They were in bed together about 8 o'clock at night, holding hands. Now my mother was not terribly lucid, and
Okay.
my father had he had a little bit of dementia, so I didn't have his total wherewithal, but was physically fine. And they were holding hands, and he said he got agitated. And he was like, I'm going to sleep in the recliner tonight. I don't want to sleep here. I'm going to sleep in the recliner. So we
Hmm.
got him. I helped him get up. He slept in the recliner. Sunday, the next day, he stopped eating. Now, we didn't know what was going on,
Hmm.
So he stopped eating. All of a sudden, he couldn't walk. He couldn't get to the bathroom. My sister and I just didn't know what was happening, because the day before he was walking and eating.
And no
And
ailments. And how old was he?
92. And my mom was just turned 90. And
Okay.
so we were very confused by this. So I
Yeah.
actually got myself ready to take him to the hospital,
Hmm.
thinking something's going on, like some virus thing, and we don't know what
Sure.
it is, And then I don't know what hit me, but I was like, something? I wonder if he's a hospice candidate, because my mother, they're coming to enroll her in at-home hospice on Tuesday. And if I go with him to a hospital, now they're going to be separate. She's
Mm.
going to die and he's not going to be here.
Mm.
And I'm not sure if I should be taking him to a hospital. I'm not sure. Maybe, I
Oh,
should have the hospice people, when they come in, evaluate him.
right.
So on Tuesday, when they came in to evaluate my mother for in-home hospice, and of course she's a candidate, she's got stage 4 lung cancer. I asked them to evaluate. So they brought a doctor into the house. They evaluate my father. They pull us aside and they say to us, he's further along in the dying process than she is.
What is going
And we were
on?
like, wait, what? I mean, she's got cancer, he's got nothing, and he was eating and walking 2 days ago. Like, what do you mean?
Yeah, that's
But and then he died 2 weeks later. He died April 12th, she died April 30. But in retrospect, they held hands, and I think at a soul level,
uh-huh.
he said, "Oh, we're going home." He picked up her signal. I'll
Yes.
get my hat and coat, and I'll meet
I'm
you in the
getting
car.
like chills.
Right? I'll meet you in the car, and that's exactly what he did.
Oh my gosh.
And I'll take you home, and I'll be there to take you home. So, yeah, that's their story, which is very powerful.
Yeah.
But it gets better if you want to hear the good part.
Stop it. Yes, I do want to hear it, but you're making me cry because I'm very sensitive. All right, continue.
So my father, for years
fascinating.
before he died, he couldn't understand why God was keeping him alive. He was old. It was hard for him to get around. He had rheumatoid arthritis, so it would be tough he walked with a cane. And so he would always be like, why am I still here? Why am I still here? Why is God keeping me here? Why am I
Right.
still here?
Yeah.
For years. So we would openly talk about death and dying in the last 4 years of his life. My mother never wanted to talk about it because she was more than happy to be alive.
Oh, okay.
She did not want to die. And
She's
so,
always wanting to stay longer.
she wanted to stay longer. And he was just ready to go. So for 5 days before he died, although I didn't know it was going to be 5 days, I just was caring for him in an in-home hospice, and he was not eating and all of a sudden totally bedridden. And he would say to me, I think today is the day I'm going to die, which he had said every day for 4 years. And I would say, like, I don't know, Dad, I don't have a magic 8-ball, but you seem pretty okay. I don't think today's the day. But now he's at in-home hospice. So my answer is changing.
Yeah.
And I'm saying, I think it may be soon, Dad. I think it may be soon. And so I made a pact with him that when he got to heaven, he would send me a sign. I said, when you get to heaven, I need to know you got there, because now I understand the afterlife. So I said, I need to see a white swan when you get there. Now, he and my uncle, they were twin flames. They were very, very close. And my mother-in-law enlisted my uncle to help me understand about the afterlife. So my uncle's pretty prominent in my book also.
Okay.
So at any rate, he and my uncle, his brother, had started a dry cleaner company in our town called White Swan Dry Cleaners. And they sold the company in 1985 or 1986, so very long ago. But they maintained the name White Swan. The new owners maintained the name. And so I thought a white swan would be a nice sign for my father to give me when he gets to heaven. So I know he got there. So for 5 days, every day, I was like, you have to send me a white swan. And he'd be like, if I can. And I was like, you'll be able to. You've got to send me a white swan. I need to know you made it to heaven. I need to know you made it to heaven.
That doesn't sound like an easy sign.
Well,
necessarily, because I mean, how often do you see white swans?
Right.
I don't know. I don't.
But that's the sign I asked for. So after he dies, I was April 12th in the morning. We go through a very difficult day because we went to the funeral home and we picked out both caskets because my mother's at home in bed. We went to his dry cleaner and we brought both the burial outfits. It was a very emotional, very difficult, really horrible day. Horrible. The masks, those little mask cards, it was very difficult. And about 9:00 at night, I'm back at his house, where my mother is, and I open my computer, my iPad, just to troll around a little bit, and I go on Facebook because I like Facebook, so I just go on it like it's one of the first things. And one of the things that comes up based on, I guess, algorithms or whatever, is a fellow who's in a closed group that I'm in my town of Farmingdale, New York. And this fellow says, I just moved to Farmingdale. Can anybody recommend a dry cleaner? And I'm scrolling through the answers. White swan, white swan, white swan, white swan, white swan. And I'm thinking, oh, I think my dad made it to heaven.
I see. I gotcha.
Gets better. So I was so excited. So I posted online that I think my father made it to heaven. I post the situation. And Camille Dan, who is the woman who compiled the book, the anthology Gatherings at the Doorway, which I have a chapter.
Who I interviewed.
Okay. So Camille Dan sees my post, looks out of her cottage and sees 2 white swans like that morning, right after reading my post. So she private message sends me these 2 swans. And she goes, I think your dad is endorsing our book. I don't know Camille except through the book.
Oh, okay.
Like, I think he's like in favor of the book. And I'm like, that's really cool. Gets better. That next day, I speak to my father's neighbor, who I grew up with. He bought the house from his mother. And he's not on Facebook. And I tell him the story. I say, he says, I'm so sorry about your dad. How's your mom doing? Whatever. And I tell him the story about the white swan. The day after that, so I think we're at Thursday now, so 2 days after my dad died, Joe, the neighbor, sends me a picture of a white swan. He says, this is sort of odd, but one of my friends is out walking and sent a picture of a swan to all of us in a group chat. And I was like, Well, that
What?
is sort of odd because a guy to a guy sending a white swan, that is sort of odd,
That's,
but okay, I'll take it. Gets better.
gosh, what in the world? Okay.
That night, Joe, the next door neighbor, texts me and he goes, "Your father's cracking me up. Turn on Wheel of Fortune." Wheel of Fortune is a game show
Yeah.
where there's a clue and then there's an answer and they turn letters over for the
Mhm.
answer. And the clue was living thing and the answer was white swan.
Wow. That is cool.
That is cool.
That is cool. Oh my gosh.
That is cool.
What a love story though with your folks, man.
Yeah. And my father went in a very quiet way before he woke up, very quiet because that's how he was. And my mother, and his was a weekday. So my sister and I were working remotely, and 6 a.m. we woke up and he was not breathing and he was still warm. So
Wow.
he must have gone right around then, very quietly.
Mhm.
My mother waited until Saturday, and I'll say almost prime time because my sister and I, were not working. So we were both there, and my daughter actually came over with bagels for breakfast. So my sister and daughter and I, my adult daughter, all had bagels for breakfast that morning. And then we went in to sit with my mother. And even though she was not lucid at all and hadn't opened her eyes or eaten for at least, over a week, and we were sure it was going to be soon, but she seemed stable too, so I don't know. And I was sitting on a recliner sort of behind the bed, and my sister and daughter was sitting on either side of her. And the way they were sitting, I just said, "Can you guys hold her hands? Because I just think you should be holding her hands." So they each held one of her hands. And as they did that, my daughter started crying, sobbing uncontrollably, like very loud, because it was very emotional. And so she's crying, and I'm like, "What's going on?" So I said, "Let's pray." So we start praying, "Our Father who art in heaven, Hail Mary, Mother of Grace." So we start praying very loudly. My daughter's crying. I get up and I look. My mother's got her eyes closed, her tear coming down her eyes, they're closed.
Wow.
And my sister's praying. My daughter's crying. I'm praying. And my mother, her eyes wide open, looks up in the corner of the room. So I'm convinced it's my dad, or, just knowing the afterlife. I start very loud, "Mom, go to the light. There's no pain in heaven. Just go to the light. You've got to get to the light. Go. Dad, grab her, take her soul." My sister's praying, "Our Father who art in heaven." My daughter's crying. It was just, and my mother's like, she looks smack at my sister for a second. She looks over there and she's gone. She just closes her eyes and she's gone. So it was this intense, like,
Wow.
2-3 minutes with a lot of emotion and all her female energy around her. Her 2 female dogs, her granddaughter, her 2 daughters, her only 2 daughters, just all around, all surrounding her. And I really want to know if my dad was there to take her, or was it her mother or her sister? I don't know. But I intend to. In all my learnings, I've never done a one-on-one with a medium.
Oh.
Never done that. I went to because I never really needed any particular message. I was more interested in learning. So the group events were more interesting to me because I would learn more from them. But I am going to make a one-on-one appointment, or probably myself and my daughter, because I really want someone to tap into my mother and say, "Was Dad there for you?" And who was there for my father? It had to be my Uncle Charlie. So
oh yeah.
I want to know.
Wow.
So, yeah.
So another book, huh? Gonna have to do
another.
like,
everything I had in that one book. Like the other is more a story about me, although there's a lot to it. And I will put pen to paper and write it down. But my book, Your Soul Focus, really was intended not to talk about my life. That's why I called it Your Soul Focus, but to speak more about things that pertain to everyone.
Right.
So that they can learn more about how their life interfaces with the other side. Not so much about my life, although it's very validating to hear these things, which is great. It's really more about, now that there's an afterlife, what can you do with it?
Yes, yes. Wow. I thank you so much for sharing. That's so it's just so heart touching.
Yeah, this is the first time I'm sharing. Obviously, they just died. So this is the first interview I've done. They would love my interviews. They would listen to them, and the fact my book was selling well, they were so happy about that. But I haven't really I didn't do interviews during the time that I was caring for them. And this is the first
Yeah.
YouTube interview where I'm sharing,
Thank you for
their
sharing.
story.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, no, thank you for listening.
Gosh, I would love to know how the listeners can connect with you, but also current projects. Of course, you mentioned Camille's book, but what else is going on with you now?
So I have a website. It's AnnetteMarinaccio.com, and I tell everybody connect to it because there's a lot of great content on there. There's not only the links to get my book, but all of the interviews I've done are wonderful,
Okay.
and all of the hosts like yourself who interview me are wonderful and have podcasts or YouTube shows where they're really exploring a lot of metaphysical topics. And
Yeah.
so there's just a wealth of knowledge for anybody there. In addition, as you mentioned, I was selected, or one of the authors that contributed a chapter to Camille Dan's anthology, Gatherings at the Doorway. And so that was published a month ago. And so I'm very excited about that also. So those two books are my book, and that book that is I'm one of many authors, are really just my way of getting the afterlife topic out there. As I mentioned at the beginning, I have a great job that I love, and I work, a lot of hours. So that's really what I love doing. I really just wanted to put my toe into the afterlife topics to really open it up for people, as your the title of your show is, to make the ordinary unordinary ordinary, to make the
Right.
unordinary ordinary. So yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to put these links in the video description. What's the name of the website again?
AnnetteMarinaccio.com. My
Okay.
name.
Okay, I'll put that there. I'll link your book. I'll link Camille's book as well.
And I also have the Instagram at Annette Marinaccio. So I
Okay.
have my Instagram, and I have a Facebook page for Your Soul Focus called Your Soul Focus.
Oh, do you want me to link those two then?
Yeah, sure.
I Instagram and that one. Okay.
Yeah. So I
Well, lots of
I
options.
post there, and what's wonderful is people from all around the world who read the book, make comments on there, and I see they speak with each other, which is just so cool.
Oh yeah. Wow, this has been great. I've loved this. What I like to do though, Annette, if it's okay with you, is I like to leave my guests with any last words. So if there's just anything you're thinking you wanted to share that we didn't get a chance to share, or just anything on your heart, or words of encouragement, maybe?
Sure. I'm going to give, you'll see in my book, I have a lot of analogies because I've learned a lot. And one of the things I've always done, and I even do in my practical work life, is I try and take elusive topics and make them relatable to anybody. And so what I'd like to convey to people that may be in grief and may be struggling with why they are not getting signs.
Oh, okay.
Because some people do get signs,
Yep.
and some people
And some
don't.
don't.
So it's just like, why am I not getting signs?
Yeah, absolutely.
I like to give people this analogy. Everybody has been in a situation where they've seen a toddler meltdown, whether it's their own toddler or niece or nephew, or in a store, a stranger. Everyone can relate to a meltdown of a 5-year-old. So if you take an example of a 5-year-old who is begging their parent for a candy bar or breakfast or something like that, and the parent saying no, and this kid's absolutely melting down, and you're looking at that kid as an adult, and you feel very badly because they're absolutely melting down, but you also have a different perspective. And so you understand that that candy bar really doesn't mean much, that this kid is going to get a million candy bars probably, in his life, and may even have one after lunch. And he's going to grow up, and he's going to contribute to society, and he'll fall in love, and he'll fall out of love, and may have children. And that candy bar is meaningless compared to what as an adult his life is.
Sure.
And that is how the other side looks at us. So we are crying and screaming about how grief-stricken we are, but they have a different perspective. It's
Right.
not that they know all, but they have a wider, more broad perspective than we have, the way
Yeah.
we have a more broad perspective than that child has.
Sure. Yeah, that makes
And
sense.
so they understand that even though we may be horribly grief-stricken and be begging for a sign, that this life is a teeny sliver of our soul's whole existence. And it's not that it's meaningless, like that candy bar isn't totally meaningless. It's not like this life is meaningless,
Right.
but it doesn't have the same value
It's like a
that
totally
we
different
think it has.
perspective. Yeah.
So we're intentionally sort of born with these kind of dunce caps on, blinders,
Yeah.
that make us very intent on this
Yeah.
earthly life, and living this earthly life to the fullest,
Right. Yeah.
and those deep emotions that hurt so badly.
Mm.
But they are really intended to stretch and grow our soul. I mean, that's really what they're intended to do, and they're doing their job, these horrible and tough grief emotions. But the other side looks at us the way we look at a child screaming about a candy bar. So when you're thinking, why aren't you just giving me your signs?
Yeah.
It's really not that important.
Hmm.
We think it's important, like kids think
Yes.
candy bars.
That
So
makes sense.
I just want to take that elusive, difficult to answer topic and
Yeah.
make
Yeah.
something that people can relate to.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
Oh, sure, no problem.
Well, this has been amazing, Annette.
Thank you.
So appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
And thank you to everyone watching. This has been Julie McVey with Unordinary Made Ordinary. And I hope you'll join us next time for another amazing interview. And if you like this, give it a thumbs up, please. And if you enjoy the content that we're sharing on the channel, please subscribe. And I hope you're all having a wonderful day or evening wherever you are on the planet or off the planet. And we will see you all next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.